I never knew my father. Growing up, that sentence felt like a weight I carried everywhere. My mom refused to talk about him, shutting down every question with the same tight-lipped response, "He's gone, and that's all you need to know." I spent my childhood creating stories about him in my head. Maybe he was a soldier who died before I was born. Maybe he was a musician who traveled the world. Maybe he just didn't know I existed. By the time I turned 23, the not knowing had become unbearable. That's when I saw the ad for AncestryTrace, one of those DNA testing companies that promise to connect you with long-lost relatives. I ordered the kit on a Tuesday night, spitting into a tube and sealing it up like I was sending away a piece of myself. 6 weeks, they said. 6 weeks until I might finally have answers. The waiting was torture. I checked my email constantly, refreshing the page dozens of times a day. When the results finally came through on a rainy October morning, my hands shook as I opened my laptop. The interface was clean and simple, showing a colorful map of my ancestry and a list of DNA matches. There were distant cousins, 4th and 5th removed, people I'd never heard of scattered across 3 states. But one match stopped me cold. It was labeled Close Family Match Estimated Relationship, Uncle or Half-Sibling. The profile name was blank, just a user number, JD_47291. No photo, no family tree, no information at all. Just those words that made my heart pound: "This person shares approximately 25% of your DNA." I clicked on the profile, hoping for more details, but there was nothing. The account had been created years ago and never updated. I should have been excited, but something felt wrong. Why would a close relative have such a blank profile? I sent a message through the site's messaging system, my fingers flying over the keyboard. "Hi. We matched as close relatives. I'm looking for information about my biological father. Do you know anything about the surname Martinez? My mom's name is Carmen Martinez. Please reach out if you can help." I hit send and waited. Hours passed. Then days. Then a full week. Nothing. The silence was worse than not knowing. I started researching, diving into online forums about DNA testing and genealogy. That's when I learned that sometimes law enforcement agencies uploaded DNA from crime scenes to these databases, trying to catch criminals through their relatives. They called it genetic genealogy. My stomach turned. What if JD_47291 wasn't a person looking for family? What if it was something else entirely? 2 weeks after I sent my message, I got a call from an unknown number. I almost didn't answer, but something made me pick up. "Is this Sarah Martinez?" a man's voice asked. He sounded official, almost too calm. I confirmed it was me, my throat suddenly dry. "This is Special Agent Marcus Webb with the FBI. I need to speak with you about a DNA match you made on AncestryTrace. Can we meet in person?" My entire world tilted. The FBI. Why would the FBI be calling me? I agreed to meet him the next day at a coffee shop downtown, my mind racing with possibilities. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about that blank profile, about the 25% DNA match, about my mom's secrets. What had I stumbled into? When morning came, I felt like I'd been awake for days. Agent Webb was exactly what you'd picture an FBI agent to look like. Mid-40s, dark suit, serious eyes that seemed to see straight through you. He ordered a black coffee and sat across from me in a corner booth, pulling out a thin folder. "Thank you for meeting with me, Sarah," he began, his voice measured. "I know this must be confusing. The profile you matched with, JD_47291, is connected to an ongoing investigation. We uploaded DNA from a crime scene to several genealogy databases 3 years ago, hoping to generate leads. Your match is the closest we've ever gotten." My coffee sat untouched in front of me. "What kind of crime?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Agent Webb's expression didn't change. In 1994, there was an armed robbery at a jewelry store in Portland, Oregon. The owner was killed. We recovered DNA from the scene, but it didn't match anyone in our criminal database. The case went cold. Until now. 1994. I wasn't even born yet. This crime happened 30 years ago, and somehow my DNA was connected to it. I don't understand, I said, my brain struggling to process. I wasn't alive in 1994. How can I be a match? Agent Webb leaned forward slightly. You're not a suspect, Sarah. But the DNA from that crime scene matches someone who shares 25% of your genetic material. Based on the percentage, we're looking at either an uncle, an aunt, a grandparent, or a half-sibling. We need your help building a family tree to narrow down who that person might be. I felt like I was drowning. I don't know my father's side of the family, I admitted. That's why I took the test. My mom never told me anything about him. Agent Webb nodded like he'd expected this. That's okay. We can work with what you do know. Let's start with your mother's side. Over the next hour, I told him everything. My mom, Carmen Martinez, grew up in Sacramento. Her parents, my grandparents, had both passed away before I was born. She had one brother, my Uncle Victor, who I'd known my whole life. Uncle Victor was the cool uncle, the one who showed up with gifts on my birthday, who taught me how to ride a bike, who always had a joke ready. He worked as a mechanic and lived alone in a small house across town. The thought of connecting him to any of this felt impossible. Agent Webb wrote everything down, asking questions about dates and places. Then he asked the question that changed everything. Your mother and Uncle Victor, do they have any other siblings? I shook my head. No, just the two of them. He looked up from his notes. And your Uncle Victor, has he ever been to Portland, Oregon? The question hung in the air between us. I don't know, I said slowly. Maybe. He traveled for work sometimes, back in the 90s. He used to do custom motorcycle repairs and would drive all over the West Coast for jobs. Agent Webb's pen stopped moving. Something shifted in his expression, a tightness around his eyes. Sarah, I need to ask you something, and I need you to think carefully before you answer. Is there any way Uncle Victor could be your biological father? The words hit me like a physical blow. My uncle? My father? The idea was so wrong, so twisted, that my mind rejected it immediately. But then pieces started clicking together in horrible ways. The way my mom never talked about my father. The way Uncle Victor had always been around, more involved in my life than seemed normal for an uncle. The way my mom and Victor barely spoke to each other at family gatherings, a tension I'd always noticed but never questioned. No, I whispered, but even as I said it, doubt crept in. That can't be right. That's impossible. Agent Webb's voice softened. I'm not saying it's true. I'm saying it's something we need to consider. If Victor is your biological father, that would make the crime scene DNA match his brother or parent. But if he's your uncle like you've always believed, then the crime scene DNA could be his. The room felt too small, the air too thick. You think my Uncle Victor killed someone? I asked, my voice breaking. Agent Webb closed his folder. I think we need to investigate every possibility. I'm going to need you to help us build a more detailed family tree. We'll need information about everyone in your family, their ages, where they lived in 1994, anything you can remember. Can you do that? I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. What choice did I have? If you're finding this story as crazy as I did living through it, please hit that like button and subscribe. You won't believe where this goes next. The next few weeks were a nightmare. Agent Webb gave me his card and told me to compile everything I could remember about my family. I started with the basics, writing down names and dates, but the more I dug, the more questions I had. I called my mom, trying to sound casual. Hey Mom, I was just thinking about the family. Whatever happened to Grandpa Martinez's brother? Did he have any siblings? Her response was sharp. Why are you asking about this? I made up some excuse about a school project, even though I'd graduated college 2 years ago. She didn't buy it but eventually told me that my grandfather had one brother, Tomas, who died in a car accident in 1989. Dead end. That meant the crime scene DNA couldn't be a grandparent or a great-uncle. The circle was closing around Uncle Victor. I decided to do something risky. I went to visit Uncle Victor at his auto shop, a cramped garage that smelled like oil and metal. He looked up from under a car hood when I walked in, his face breaking into that familiar smile. "Sarah, what brings you by?" He wiped his hands on a rag, grease staining his fingers. We made small talk for a few minutes, but I couldn't focus. I kept looking at him, trying to see a killer in his eyes, trying to reconcile the man who taught me how to change a tire with someone who might have taken a life. Finally, I worked up the courage. "Uncle Victor, did you ever go to Portland? Like, back in the 90s? His smile faltered for just a second, so quick I almost missed it. "Portland? Maybe once or twice for work." "Why?" I shrugged, trying to seem casual. "Just curious. I'm thinking about taking a trip there." He turned back to the car, and I couldn't see his face anymore. "It's a nice city," he said, his voice careful. "You should go." That tiny hesitation, that fraction of a second where his smile dropped, it haunted me. I left the shop feeling sick. That night, I called Agent Webb and told him about the conversation. He listened without interrupting, then said words that made my blood run cold. "We're going to need to bring him in for questioning. We have enough circumstantial evidence now to get a warrant for his DNA. Sarah, I need you to understand something. If your uncle is responsible for this crime, and if he figures out that you're the reason we found him, there could be consequences. You need to be careful." I wanted to ask what kind of consequences, but I was afraid of the answer. Instead, I asked when. Agent Webb's response was immediate. "Tomorrow." I didn't sleep that night either. I kept thinking about Uncle Victor, about every memory I had with him. The time he drove 3 hours to pick me up when my car broke down in college. The way he always remembered my favorite candy. The jokes, the laughs, the normalcy of it all. How could someone like that be a murderer? But I also thought about the blank expression on his face when I mentioned Portland, the way he turned away from me. People weren't always what they seemed. The next morning, I got a text from Agent Webb. "It's done. We executed the warrant at 6 a.m. He's in custody." My hands shook as I read those words. I'd done this. I'd given them Uncle Victor. My phone rang 10 minutes later. It was my mom, and she was screaming. "What did you do? What did you do, Sarah? The FBI just arrested Victor. They said it was because of a DNA test. What did you do?" I tried to explain, the words tumbling out in a confused rush, but she wouldn't listen. "You stupid, stupid girl," she sobbed. "You have no idea what you've done. You've ruined everything." She hung up before I could respond. I sat there in my apartment, staring at my phone, feeling like my entire world had collapsed. I'd been looking for my father and instead I'd destroyed my family. The guilt was overwhelming, a physical weight pressing down on my chest. But underneath the guilt was something else, a need to know the truth. I had to understand what really happened in Portland 30 years ago. I called Agent Webb back. "I need to know everything," I said. "I need to know what he did." There was a long pause. Then Agent Webb said, "Come to the field office. I'll tell you what I can." The FBI field office was nothing like the movies. It was just a regular office building with extra security. Agent Webb met me in a conference room, that same folder in front of him, now much thicker. He opened it and pulled out crime scene photos. I forced myself to look. The jewelry store was small, family-owned. The owner, David Chun, was 42 when he died. He had a wife and 2 young daughters. He'd been shot twice during the robbery, once in the chest and once in the head. The suspects took approximately $50,000 in jewelry and cash. They were never caught. Until now. DNA recovered from a broken window matches your uncle's profile with 99.7% certainty, Agent Webb explained. We also found old security footage we're reviewing with new technology. We're building a case. I stared at the photo of David Chun, a smiling Asian man with kind eyes. Did Victor act alone? I asked. Agent Webb shook his head. We believe there were 2 suspects. The DNA tells us Victor was definitely there, but witness statements from 1994 mentioned 2 men. We're still trying to identify the second person. 2 men. I thought about Uncle Victor's friends from back then, the guys he used to work with, but I'd been so young that I barely remembered any of them. What happens now? I asked. Agent Webb gathered the photos back into the folder. We build the case. There'll be a trial. You'll likely be called as a witness to explain how the DNA match occurred. Your uncle has already requested a lawyer and isn't talking, but the evidence is strong. Sarah, I know this is hard, but you did the right thing. David Chen's family deserves justice. They've waited 30 years. I wanted to believe him. I wanted to feel like a hero, like I'd done something good. But all I felt was broken. Don't forget to like this video and subscribe to stay updated on what happened next. Trust me, you need to hear the rest. The arrest made local news within 24 hours. Man arrested in 30-year-old cold case murder, caught through Genealogy website. They didn't use my name, but everyone in my family knew. My phone exploded with messages. Cousins I barely talked to called me a traitor. My aunt, Victor's ex-wife, sent me a 3-page text message calling me every name she could think of. And my mom stopped speaking to me entirely. She wouldn't answer my calls, wouldn't respond to my texts. I drove to her house and she wouldn't open the door. Through the window, I could see her sitting on the couch, staring straight ahead, ignoring my knocking. I'd never felt so alone in my life. The only person who would talk to me was Agent Webb, and even those conversations were clinical, focused on the case. 3 months after the arrest, I was subpoenaed to testify before a grand jury. They needed me to explain how the DNA match worked, how I'd used AncestryTrace, what led me to upload my DNA in the first place. I sat in a formal room surrounded by strangers and told them about my search for my father, about the mysterious match, about that first meeting with Agent Webb. They asked if I knew Uncle Victor had committed a crime when I took the test. I said no. They asked if I would have taken the test if I'd known it would lead to his arrest. I didn't know how to answer that. Finally, I said, I just wanted to find my dad. I never meant for any of this to happen. The grand jury indicted Uncle Victor on charges of felony murder and armed robbery. His bail was set at $1 million, which he couldn't pay. He sat in jail waiting for trial. I started having nightmares. In them, I'd be back in Uncle Victor's auto shop, but instead of cars, there were bodies. David Chun would be there, asking me why I took so long to find his killer. Uncle Victor would be there too, asking me why I betrayed him. I'd wake up sweating, my heart racing, unable to fall back asleep. I stopped leaving my apartment except for work. I couldn't face people's questions, couldn't handle their judgment. Some people thought I was brave. Most thought I was a snitch who ruined my own family. Both groups made me feel terrible. Then, 6 months after the arrest, something unexpected happened. Agent Webb called me with news. We identified the second suspect, he said. His name was Raymond Ortiz. He died in 2003 from a drug overdose. We found evidence linking him to the crime through old financial records and phone logs. Victor and Raymond worked together at a custom motorcycle shop in 1994, and they traveled to Portland together that September. The pieces were all falling into place, a puzzle I'd never wanted to solve. Does this change anything for the trial? I asked. Agent Webb's answer was matter of fact. It strengthens our case. We can show motive and planning. Raymond had gambling debts. Victor needed money for child support payments. Child support. The words stopped me cold. What child support? I asked, though part of me already knew the answer. Agent Webb's silence spoke volumes. Then he said quietly, Sarah, your uncle is your biological father. We confirmed it through the DNA evidence. Your mother and Victor had a relationship when she was 19. You were the result. He was supposed to pay support, but he struggled financially. That's likely why he participated in the robbery. The world tilted again, just like it had in that coffee shop 6 months ago. Everything I'd known about my identity was a lie. I confronted my mom. I showed up at her house and refused to leave until she talked to me. She finally opened the door, her eyes red from crying, looking 10 years older than she had before all this started. We sat in her kitchen, the same kitchen where I'd eaten breakfast as a child, where Uncle Victor, my father, had sat at this same table countless times. "Why didn't you tell me?" I asked, my voice surprisingly steady. My mom's hands shook as she poured herself tea. "Because I was ashamed," she whispered. "Victor and we made a mistake when we were young. I got pregnant, and he wanted to run away together, but my parents were so strict. They made me promise never to tell anyone the truth, said it would ruin the family. So we agreed to pretend Victor was just your uncle. We thought we were protecting you." "Protecting me?" I repeated, anger finally breaking through my numbness. "You let me grow up thinking my father abandoned me. You let me search for him, knowing he was right there the whole time. And now I've sent my own father to prison for murder because you couldn't tell me the truth." My mom broke down completely, sobbing into her hands. "I never thought this would happen. Never in a million years. When Victor told me what he'd done, what he and Raymond did in Portland, I begged him to turn himself in. But he said it was too late, that too much time had passed. He promised me it was a one-time thing, that he'd never do anything like that again. And he didn't. He became a good man, Sarah. He took care of you, loved you, even if he couldn't claim you as his daughter. That robbery haunted him every day of his life." I stood up, unable to sit at that table anymore. "A man died, Mom. David Chun had a family. He had daughters who grew up without their father, just like I thought I grew up without mine. Except their father was actually gone, actually dead, because of what Victor did. How can you defend that?" She looked up at me, mascara running down her face. "I'm not defending it. I'm just saying that people are complicated. Victor made a terrible choice 30 years ago, but he's also the man who taught you how to swim, who came to every school play, who loved you even when he couldn't say he was your father. Can't he be both things?" I left without answering because I didn't have an answer. She was right. Victor was both things. The man I loved and the man who killed David Chun. Somehow, I had to find a way to hold both truths in my mind at once. The trial started in February, exactly 1 year after I'd first sent my DNA to AncestryTrace. I had to testify, walking into a courtroom and facing Uncle Victor, my father, for the first time since his arrest. He looked smaller somehow, defeated. When I took the stand and our eyes met, he gave me a tiny nod. Not angry, not accusatory. Just sad. I explained the DNA testing process, my search for my biological father, the match that started everything. The defense attorney tried to argue that the DNA evidence was obtained improperly, that I hadn't consented to law enforcement use, but the judge shut that down quickly. Genealogy was legal. I'd uploaded my DNA to a public database. The consequences were mine to live with. David Chen's daughters were there, sitting in the front row. They were in their 30s now, around my age. They watched me testify with expressions I couldn't read. If this story has you hooked, please like and subscribe. The ending will shock you. The prosecution built a devastating case. They had the DNA evidence, the security footage enhanced with new technology that clearly showed Victor's face, the financial records proving motive, and witness testimony from people who remembered Victor and Raymond traveling to Portland that September. The defense didn't have much. They tried to argue that 30 years was too long, that memories fade, that technology can be wrong. But the evidence was overwhelming. After 2 weeks of testimony, the jury deliberated for only 6 hours. Guilty on all counts. Felony murder. Armed robbery. When the verdict was read, Victor's shoulders slumped. He didn't look at me. The judge set sentencing for 3 weeks later. I went home and cried for hours, mourning the father I'd just found and just lost, mourning the uncle I'd loved, mourning David Chen, mourning everything. Sentencing day was worse than the verdict. David Chen's widow spoke, talking about the 30 years she'd spent without her husband, the grief that never fully healed, the grandchildren he'd never meet. Then his daughters spoke, their voices strong and clear. The younger one, Emily, looked directly at me as she finished. "I want to thank Sarah Martinez," she said. "I know this couldn't have been easy for her. She made a choice to seek truth, and that truth gave our family closure we never thought we'd have. My father's killer will finally face justice, and that's because of her courage." I wasn't expecting that. I'd imagined they hated me, or at least were indifferent to my pain. But Emily's words suggested something different, that maybe in the midst of all this destruction, something good had come from it too. The judge sentenced Victor to 25 years to life. With his age and behavior, he'd likely die in prison. After the sentencing, as they led him away in handcuffs, Victor turned and looked at me one last time. He mouthed 3 words, "I love you." I couldn't say them back. Not because I didn't feel them, but because my throat had closed up completely, tears streaming down my face. Agent Webb found me in the hallway afterward, sitting on a bench and trying to compose myself. "Sarah," he said gently, "I know this isn't easy. But you should know that David Chen's family specifically asked to meet you if you're willing." I looked up at him, surprised. Why would they want to meet me? He sat down beside me. "Because you gave them something they'd lost hope of ever having, justice." I met Emily and her sister Lisa at a small cafe near the courthouse. We sat across from each other, 3 women connected by tragedy and DNA, trying to figure out what to say. Finally, Emily broke the silence. "I was 7 when my dad died," she said. Lisa was 5. "We barely remember him, just fragments and photographs. For 30 years, we lived with the knowledge that someone had taken him from us and gotten away with it. That wound never closed. It just festered." Lisa nodded, her eyes wet. Every birthday, every holiday, every major life event, there was this hole where he should have been. And the worst part was not knowing if we'd ever get answers. So when we heard about the arrest, about how it happened, we couldn't believe it. "I'm sorry," I said, the words feeling inadequate. "I never meant to, I was just looking for my dad. I didn't know any of this would happen." Emily reached across the table and took my hand. "Don't apologize," she said firmly. "You did what we'd been praying someone would do for 3 decades. You told the truth. That took courage, especially when it cost you so much." We talked for over an hour. They told me stories about their father, about the man Victor had killed. David Chen had loved photography, terrible puns, and his daughters more than anything in the world. He'd been saving money to expand his store, to build something to pass down to them. That dream died with him. Hearing these details made David Chen real to me in a way the crime scene photos never had. He wasn't just a victim anymore. He was a person, a father, someone who mattered. Before we parted ways, Lisa asked me a question I wasn't prepared for. "Do you still love him? Your uncle, your father?" I thought about it, really thought about it. "Yes," I finally answered. "I love the man who raised me, who taught me things, who was there for me. But I also have to accept that he did something terrible, something unforgivable. I don't know how to reconcile those 2 versions of him. Maybe I never will." Emily squeezed my hand one last time. "That's okay," she said. "People are complicated. You're allowed to grieve what you've lost, even if what you've lost wasn't what you thought it was." We exchanged numbers and promised to stay in touch. As I watched them leave, I realized something important. By finding my father, I'd given 2 other daughters closure about theirs. Maybe that was worth something. The months after the trial were strange. My relationship with my mom slowly, painfully began to heal. She sent me a letter explaining everything. How she and Victor had fallen in love as teenagers, how her parents had forced them apart, how they'd agreed to keep the secret to protect the family's reputation. She apologized for lying, but also asked me to understand the impossible position she'd been in at 19. I wasn't ready to forgive her completely, but I was ready to try. We started having coffee together once a week, rebuilding trust one conversation at a time. The rest of the family remained divided. Some relatives refused to speak to me. Others quietly reached out, admitting they'd always suspected something wasn't right about the official story of my parentage. I visited Victor in prison once, about 6 months after his sentencing. I'd gone back and forth on whether to do it, but ultimately I needed to hear his side directly. He looked older, grayer, the prison uniform making him seem smaller than I remembered. We sat across from each other with a glass partition between us, speaking through phones. "Why did you do it?" I asked, getting straight to the point. Victor was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "Raymond and I needed money. I had child support to pay, for you, And I was broke. He had gambling debts. We planned it for weeks, convinced ourselves it would be quick and easy, that no one would get hurt. But David Chun fought back. He tried to stop us. And Raymond panicked and shot him. You were there, I said. You let it happen. You ran away and let his family suffer for 30 years. Victor's eyes filled with tears. I know. There's not a day that's gone by that I haven't thought about it, that I haven't hated myself for it. I wanted to turn myself in so many times, but I was a coward. I told myself that you needed me, that Carmen needed me, that going to prison wouldn't bring David Chun back. I justified it in every way I could. But the truth is, I was just scared. He pressed his hand against the glass. Sarah, I need you to know something. Everything I did for you, every moment we spent together, that was real. I loved being your father, even if I couldn't call myself that. You were the best thing in my life, and I'm so sorry I ruined it. I looked at this man. My father, my uncle, a murderer, a coward, someone who loved me, and felt a tangle of emotions I couldn't name. I don't know if I can forgive you, I told him honestly. Not for the lie about being my father. I understand why you and Mom did that. But for David Chun, for his family, for all the years they suffered. I don't know how to get past that. Victor nodded, tears running down his face. I don't expect you to forgive me. I just wanted you to know the truth, all of it. And I want you to know that even though I'm in here, even though I deserve to be in here, I'm proud of you. You did the right thing, even when it was hard. You're a better person than I ever was. We talked for a few more minutes, mostly about practical things, how he was adjusting to prison, whether he needed anything. When our time was up, we said goodbye. As I walked out of that prison, I felt something shift inside me. I'd spent a year feeling guilty, feeling like I'd betrayed my family, questioning whether I'd done the right thing. But talking to Victor, hearing him admit what he'd done and why, I finally understood something crucial. His choices weren't my responsibility. I'd simply told the truth. What happened after that, the arrest, the trial, the conviction, those were consequences of his actions 30 years ago, not mine last year. I'd been carrying guilt that wasn't mine to carry. Please like, subscribe, and share this video. Your support means everything. Today, almost 2 years after I sent that DNA sample to AncestryTrace, my life looks completely different. I'm in therapy, working through the trauma and confusion of everything that happened. My mom and I have rebuilt our relationship on a foundation of honesty instead of secrets. We talk about Victor now, about the good and the bad, acknowledging both. I'm in touch with Emily and Lisa Chen. We meet every few months for coffee, an unlikely friendship born from shared tragedy. They've told me more stories about their father, and I've shared memories of mine. We're all trying to heal together. I never did find out who my biological grandfather was on Victor's side. He apparently had a brief relationship with my grandmother before she married my grandfather. Some mysteries remain unsolved. I still think about that simple decision to order a DNA test, about how one choice to seek truth cascaded into consequences I never could have imagined. If I could go back, would I do it differently? I honestly don't know. On one hand, I tore apart my family and sent my father to prison. On the other hand, I gave the Chun family justice they'd been seeking for 30 years. I gave them closure, peace, the ability to finally move forward. Both things are true. Both things matter. I've learned that life isn't about clear-cut right and wrong. Sometimes you make a choice for one reason. I wanted to find my dad, and it leads somewhere completely unexpected. All you can do is be honest about your intentions and accept the consequences, whatever they may be. I also learned something about forgiveness. I've forgiven my mom for lying to me all those years. I understand now that she was trapped by circumstances and family pressure, making impossible choices as a teenager. I've even started to forgive Victor, not for the murder. I don't think I can ever reconcile that, but for being human, for making terrible decisions, for being both the father I loved and the killer he was. Forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting or excusing. It means accepting reality as it is and choosing not to let anger consume you. I'm still working on that last part. The anger comes and goes, usually late at night when I'm alone with my thoughts. But it's getting easier.